dark. He's having a mood swing, and so it's good to be able to get back and talk. Oh, hey, Terry, how are you?
What's up? How you doing?
I'm doing fine. But when Terry has mood swings, he goes into his little dark spot and take a little Terry time. No.
Nobody brings those out of me worse than you, Phil Martin.
I really doubt that.
You know what I realize is like I cannot call you Philip.
That's fine.
I just cannot. I've known you as Phil for too long.
Right. The official, I'll make it easy. Maybe we'll make it easier on you, and we'll.
By the way, the Philip. Do you remember? Was it in the Great Muppet Caper or whatever, where Kermit the Frog loses his memory and he goes by the name of Philip?
That's not my genre, but I think I have a vague recollection of that.
Yeah.
There's a vague recollection of that.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I've seen all the Muppet movies, but I don't remember them.
Yeah. I just remember that because it was a sign on the wall about gas, filling up your gas, and that's where he got his name from.
That's fair.
Yeah. It's
fair. So today we're going to be discussing something a little difficult in some ways. It's difficult not because it's incredibly personal, although it certainly is on some levels. It's difficult because of a couple of areas. That is, Terry and I have talked on and off about the pressure amongst those who preach to. Am I streaming anywhere? Let me just check a button.
You're streaming at your page, but not the other.
It is. Let me fix it. It shut down for a second. Like it was saying it's trying to stream, but it's not connecting to the Facebook page just yet. And so we'll see if we can punt it around a little bit and see if we can make it show up. I wonder if. That's interesting. It's never done that particular issue of issues before.
Technical glitches this morning.
Yeah, the internet is fighting us today.
Yeah, this is our second hand-to-hand combat with the internet today. We are live on YouTube, so
yeah, we're live everywhere else. It's the particular issue with the actual Do the Work Facebook page.
Well, I guess what we'll do here is we'll have to just share this to our Do the Work page from the Phil Work page.
Yeah.
As I'm doing that.
If you send that over there, I can answer this person's.
Look at that. All right. That's done.
There you go. Boom. Boom. You shared that. We're good. Maybe it will pop up there eventually. I'll kind of keep monitoring that. I'm not sure what exactly is the issue with that. It's a new thing. I will say this, and this is probably unrelated. A number of permission settings and details on Facebook have shifted in the last month that have all adjusted the way third-party software programs and stuff interact with Facebook. And it could be that, yeah. So I guess what you can also go on YouTube. YouTube has actually been incredibly consistent, and it's live now. I just got the link that it's live over there too.
Now you're ready to go. All right, welcome to Do the Work.
Welcome to Soft Open, Do the Work.
Yeah.
So it's all kind of functioning, and maybe it'll pop up. Either way, same bad ideas, same bad time, same bad concepts, same bad dialogue. So again, today's topic is an interaction of a couple of concepts. Over the last couple of years, Terry and I have been quietly discussing, sometimes even on Do the Work, the increasing pressure on those who serve as preachers, ministers in local churches, and the rising tide of individuals, even with significant amount of successful work behind them, choosing not to just like, hey, this feels better for me to literally quit preaching for reasons and do something else, for all kinds of different things. Because that intersects with what seems to be, and this is hard, this is one of the hard things to quantify, an increasing number of churches that are unable to find the right match for a local preacher. And I say that's difficult because it's really hard to kind of get an aggregate number of A and B. Like, how many churches are actually looking? How long have they been looking? And then the B side of it is, what are the reasons they can't find someone? Is it economic? Is it location? Is it social? Is it doctrinal? Like, are there factors beyond just, this is a good, healthy group to work with, and they literally can't find anybody? And so while I don't think that's the case, I don't think it's an anybody issue. I think there is a rising tide of concern that I have, that is not due to any kind of defect in the young men who want to preach. I think there's an issue there. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today. But before we get into it too much, Terry, you good? Are all your personal tech issues?
I didn't have the tech issues today.
I don't know. Yeah, I didn't know. We solved all of those somehow. Somehow. So, Paul, we are talking a little bit about the right match on that end, but more we're talking about the seeming increasing flood of empty pulpits and middle experienced guys stopping their work. Not the new ones, not the really old guys retiring, but the middle bracket.
Well, I think also that probably because our title is "What About When It's Too Much?" What we're really talking about is why guys just aren't doing this anymore.
Yeah.
We could talk about the church selection process and the interview process and all that stuff a little bit, but the main focus is, look, I mean, a Barna Poll came out that said 38% of all preachers, they use the term pastors, but we're going to say preachers, are considering walking away from the pulpit permanently. In mainstream denominations, that number jumps up to 51%, over half. Part of this is tied to COVID, but there are other things besides COVID that are playing a factor in all of this. One thing that was interesting is that about a third of those who are wanting to quit have preached for 20 years and have been in the same place for 7. So this is not a story of somebody can't find a job or somebody seems to move all the time. This is about guys who are just done. They're burnt out. They're walking away. And the number is one of the things that comes out in this is that the real reason a lot of guys don't walk away is simply for financial reasons, meaning they don't know what else they can do, and they feel stuck and trapped. If you look at some of the comments on some of these articles, that's a recurring theme, that there's a great percentage of guys who keep preaching because they feel trapped as if there's nothing else they could do. And if they could find another vocation, they'd walk away. And I think, Phil, probably that number is probably higher when you take out, sadly, when you take out the number of guys who feel stuck. And there's a lot of reasons for this. I think, first of all, to your empty pulpits churches looking, I think already there is a preacher shortage that we've kind of ignored for a while. And I think part of that has to do with we to some degree encourage our smartest and brightest to do anything else but preach. We push them to all the other things. We tell them and look, there are reasons for that. Phil, you know that. We both have sons who have done internships, who've thought about that to some degree, who don't desire that.
Right.
And I will tell you, at least from my perspective, my son's front row seat to 22 years of treatment by some brethren plays a huge hand in that. And I think that's something that really, really, really needs to be talked about. In this Barna poll, the leading reason for people walking away is because of their emotional well-being. That is the leading statistic of why they're walking away from preaching. And that's something that has to be considered and needs to be known. And I think that plays a role.
Yeah, I think all of that, like you can localize a lot of these subjects down to like in this particular region, this is an issue or that is an issue. But I want to connect it to your perspective to comments from Chris, which I think helps us narrow our concept a little bit even better. I would say first to Chris, and I don't think that battle is going away because it's just going to generationally rise up. Like whatever,
that's going to be continual.
That's a normal thing to a degree. There are systemic.
By the way, the actual focus of like grace in the Gospels or something else, old guard, new guard is going to always happen. Yeah. That's always going to be a problem.
That's a normal power dynamic between zeal and wisdom. And you have to learn to balance those things. And that's the part of maturity that takes place in the middle. But there are systemic issues that are also in that same bracket that create these things. And so one of the things that has been fixed amongst the churches that Terry and I may know of is the shift from the parsonage house preacher support model to a wage model. For the most part in the United States, that has shifted. And that's a healthy thing for both churches and preachers. It did come with a problem in that the net wage for preachers may not have stayed the same. In some churches, I think the net wage went down. In some churches, it may have stayed the same. And so that creates some issues. But this also intersects with the article that Terry has cited in that the preparatory cost for preachers varies widely. There are some guys who are trapped in preaching because there's nothing else that they can do intellectually, academically, or professionally that will allow them to either A, service the debt load on their education, like they can't pay their bills, or they can't earn enough without specialized education to pay for the kids to be in college. Like, that's the age bracket we're looking at. The kids who are just, parents who are adjusting their kids off to college. So those two pressures financially probably create that hook into a person's circumstance. And that's problematic. Like there's all kinds of trouble with that, but that's only one of the issues. I think some of these issues also are simply on how people treat a person who happens to preach. And that's something that I think is important because there are two outgrowths of that. If we don't understand that this is a person who happens to preach, we can be far less gracious with their emotional struggles and far less gracious with their spiritual struggles than we ought to be. And that, I think, probably as much as the financial issue is what's pushing these I don't want to do it anymore conversations.
Well, I mean, in this data, the actual breakdown, financial well-being is not the top two problems that the data reveals. When you look at this, the top two issues that are revealed in this are the physical and emotional well-being. Mm-hmm. Those are the biggest issues. And when you think about that, that really taps into what you're saying here is the financial stuff was a concern at one time. It's not probably where it could be, but it is way better than it was when you and I started, Phil. I mean, there's no doubt churches financially across the board, it seems like, are doing a better job of taking care of their workers. And I'm not saying that means that they can't do better in some cases. And there are certainly some places we hear about, but that's not really the issue at play. And, the issue at play gets into a question that I think is often overlooked. It's this idea of who shepherds the leadership during the tough times. When somebody struggles within the congregation, they're going to go to the shepherds and or the preacher for guidance, for comfort, for all of those things. But I think COVID really revealed this for us, that the people that carried the burden the most during COVID on needing that emotional support were the guys in the room that met, and Phil, you know this, every week, 2 weeks, month, whatever it was, for those 2 years trying to figure out, what are we going to do now? Like, what are we going to do now? And while they're in there, sometimes those meetings for us, there were some 3-hour meetings about how do we address all of this? How do we do this in a way that best takes care of all of the flock, doesn't split us, doesn't divide us, knowing that at the end of those 3 hours, you leave the meeting and you tell people what the plan is, and there's a significant percentage of your population that's going to complain about whatever you did. And what happened is you can only do that for so long, where you feel like everything that you're trying to do to protect the flock is constantly being complained about. Where one of the things that we didn't talk about either, but you could add into this, is there's a lot of elders that just stepped down over the last 2 years and said, I don't need this anymore.
Yeah. And you can include this in it. It doesn't matter which set of choices you came up with. If you came up with, hey, we're not going to change a thing, okay, then you're going to get tremendous pushback, either internally or externally from that. If you're going to change everything, tremendous pushback internally or externally. And some people are like, well, I never saw that. Well, you weren't in the room. Like that's, you know, and that's part of that. And now imagine the far more common setting where there are no elders in a local church, and how much pressure that will put on an individual who was already carrying load he shouldn't have carried. Now he's carrying more. And you
in those cases, you typically feel you got a 28 to 32-year-old preacher with no elders who becomes the de facto shepherd in the midst of a national crisis, and he's carrying the load every week and trying to do everything he can for everybody. And at the point, at what happens there is he gets to a breaking point because there's nobody coming and checking on him. There's nobody asking him how that's going, and he's the one that's having to make all the announcements, be the guy up front. He probably doesn't agree with half of what's being done, but he doesn't have a choice. And at some point, he just goes, "I don't need this anymore.
Right?
I don't need this. I can go do a lot of other things and not need this." And the main difference, I think, too, because we see a lot of younger guys walking away too, is they have more options than a guy who's been preaching for 30 years. They're younger, they can start over, and a lot of them have, Phil. Yeah. You and I know numerous guys who've been preaching for that 10 to 20-year window, and they just walk away because they know they got other options. They can do other things. Mm-hmm. And it's not worth the stress and the turmoil. I mean, I will tell you, we could come up with a lot of reasons. All of them go back to this. I mean, Chris is right to a degree. There's not a lot of open dialogue sometimes with elders. At the same time, we blame the elders for not having openness and willingness to change. The preacher can be just as guilty about that, because I've been that guy that felt that way. And looking back, I wasn't willing to change either. At the end of the day, though, what really is the problem in a lot of these cases is burnout and emotional, mental health, and guys just saying, I cannot do this anymore. I think one of the problems there, one of the articles that I read about this talks about that, you know, you either go home and you're angry and attack your family all the time, or you go home and hide from your family and don't want to talk to anybody, or even worse, you get into some addictive self-medication behavior, whether it's drugs or whatever it may be. And that's what we see happening. And so guys, in order not to be that way, they walk away. I'm done. I'm not going to do this anymore.
So here's something to think about. And there are different ways to kind of walk through this, but Chris's comment in which COVID angst exposed things, I'll suggest to you that there is a hidden blessing in the stripping bare that COVID did in some instances, where it allowed the real issues to be identified in various settings. Because you think about it, I can list out a number of churches for you that responded to all this COVID issues in wildly different ways. Like they did exactly the opposite things. In those churches where they had a plan and good leadership, those churches are continuing. Not that they didn't stop growing, they're continuing to grow by every metric you might want to apply. And so what it did is in all this middle space and groups that did not have competent quality leadership, all those failings were exposed and the pressure got too much on different individuals. Even good people who had every good intention, they got trucked over by how much weight they're now asked to carry. And so I think, the model of consumerism, all these different things, this fishbowl concept is really hard to grapple with until there's no walls anymore. Like there's no barriers that protect you from seeing it. And COVID took down a lot of those barriers for folks so that they got to see a little bit more closely some of these things on a personal level that they never had to deal with before. And in the end, the purpose here for us is not just to ruminate over how awful it was, is to identify at least a couple things that are proactive, positive behaviors to say, okay, let's do this in order to avoid that in the future. And so we can lay out this litany of issues, but we still need to move to our second half of the conversation is, well, what do we do about it? How do we address it?
One of the things to keep in mind about COVID that Tom Rainier said, that I think was really good, is that COVID did not create issues and it didn't even really expose them. It just moved them along faster, at an exponential pace. And so what happened is, and I think that even applies to this discussion, guys always walked away, but because of all the stress of everything of COVID, more walked away in a shorter period of time. It would have normally taken them 5 to 7 years to do this. They did it in 2 years. And so it looks like everything was, it's like a hurricane hitting the beach was his illustration. There's natural erosion that always happens at the beach, but you go down after a hurricane, there's this massive erosion. And that's kind of what COVID did to churches in a lot of different areas. Okay. Yeah. And so we got to understand that all of these issues, COVID created none of them. They were always there. It just massively exposed them in a way that is easier to recognize. Preacher burnout has always been a thing, Phil, but it became a bigger thing. Feeling like you're an employee and not one of the sheep has always been a thing, but it became a bigger thing because it just ramped everything up at this exponential pace. And that has been to our benefit in a sense because it allows us to have conversations that needed to always happen, but that have to happen now. Preacher burnout was like this quiet thing we kept hidden, and now it's a thing that needs to be talked about. And that's because of what happened here. So there is a benefit to a lot of these things. And one of those is these kind of conversations. Conversations about mental health and the preacher, that even before COVID, you remember there was an alarming suicide increase among pastors, among mainstream religions, and that kind of stuff was coming out more. This has been creeping up, but this kind of imploded at a level which is unignorable at this point.
Yeah. And again, to put a little lockstep on this anecdotal side of things, I'm trying to figure this out. There was a time back when preachers looking websites exist. So there was actually a mailing list that had each of those two forms. You might on average see 10 to 20 churches and 4 to 5, maybe 7 preachers looking listed on those websites. And that was like the people who are out of network. Like these are places that aren't as connected. They don't have the same tiers of experience or background. I mean, there's no more way for me to identify people looking. I can just tell you, I know far more churches looking than preachers looking. And right now, like just in one small region of the U.S., I know 10 churches that are looking. One of them has been looking for 2 years. So I think there's some tools that we can then think to on the next level. Aside from just learning to be more gracious in your human interactions with people that you're around. We've got to recognize that whatever lessons that were learned in the last 2 years have to be, and I'll use this kind of in the accommodative sense, institutionalized going forward. Like, we've got to make sure we remember them and apply them. Whether it was the need to be flexible with some of these things, the opportunity to be more understanding, or more specifically, to truly understand the amount of pressure you're putting on an individual and to not do that again. Like, we can't have one guy being the guy. Like, you just can't do that and function for very long. Yes, we can use that word, Paul. And I didn't ignore your question earlier. I'm still kind of ruminating over an answer to it, if I have a good one, regarding how elders are perceived. So I think, again, thinking it through, think about, like, all of a sudden, all those guys, and we know a number of them who are not tech guys, all of a sudden became preachers and technicians. And how much complaint was labeled in their direction, not because of the quality of their work. In some cases, they got complained at because they were doing it online instead of at the church building, or they were doing it at their home. Like, you think about all these little small details that were laid at them. A powerful thing for folks to do, maybe who aren't preachers, is to learn to engage in interference. When you see someone behaving that way, you go to them and you talk and you say, hey, that's not an issue. Like, we need to talk about that. And that's what elderships can do in the future, is to learn to see that ahead and kind of respond in advance, because there'll be another issue just like this. Historically, there's always going to be something weird.
Elderships and preachers and deacons and even members have all got to learn to defend one another. And what you call interference is really stepping in and saying, wait a minute, you're allowed to stay home with your family, but the preacher has to drive to the church building to live stream so you can see the Lord's Supper table behind him. Like, why does that matter? But he can't stay home with his family. There's a lot of those kind of things where somebody's got to stand up and reason with people, right? I think I'm going to answer Paul's question. Biblically, no, there's not a sense that the elders work for the church. They lead the church. But because we have a consumer mentality, like Chris mentioned earlier, that's what happens. But I will tell you, that's on us, and that's on elders a lot of times, because elders make their decisions reactionary to the consumers in the pew and treat them like consumers, and treat the preacher like an employee. And the preacher also is guilty for acting like an employee. And at times, Phil, this is true of some, moving around for more pay like they're an employee. And because for years we treated this with a consumer mindset, and we've operated off of that model. And what's more important is keeping people happy to put money in the plate, and then how we use the money in the plate. And that the money in the bank account so many times has become our focus more than the spiritual health of our congregation and our leadership. Then that's why we're in this model. And the reason I bring all that up is because this model, which then puts consumer happiness on the guy that carries the load of the public service, i.e. the preacher. And every time there's a problem, he's the first one to be criticized for it. That model is a huge reason why all of this is happening.
Yeah, I pinned up Hal's comment as a reminder for me to talk about this next, because it ties in to Paul's comment as well. The level of technical skill that takes place behind a well-produced internet anything is rarely seen in the initial numbers that you're thinking about, like how many people did X, Y, or Z. Amongst churches that Terry and I would know or have any kind of connection to, for the most part, their social media work has what could be qualified as very little reach whatsoever. It doesn't go beyond a very small fraction of its local user base. Like, it just simply doesn't, and that's not bad. Like, because we're not comparing it against a more realistic standard, and these produce these stress levels. Like, right now, I could identify you probably less than 10 live streams produced by churches that Terry and I would probably be invited to speak at or visit with our families that are having any kind of reach outside that small thimble level. And by thimble, I mean less than 5 likes, views, or interactions. Like, that's actually pretty not normal for all of that to get into the 10 or more likes, comments, interactions, or reaches that go into the other spaces. There's some other stuff going on. But for individuals who are used to that feedback, that immediate feedback, that noticeable return of someone present, acknowledging them in the sermon, talking about it afterwards, the internet doesn't provide any of that, and it never will. Even if it gives you 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 listeners, its feedback loop is functionally different than a physical feedback loop when it comes to the relationship building point. And the amount of effort it takes to create a good one, both time-wise and economically, is just way out of the budget range of any church USA, because any church USA is less than 100 people. And so
Well,
that
it's
means
also
any church
way out
USA.
of this. It's way out of the worker ability, because what ends up happening is all of these live streams are typically being done by the same guy that's speaking most of the time. And there may be a small volunteer staff that does things, but Phil, the big places that have these massive live stream audiences have massive production teams that warrant that kind of audience, whether it's secular or spiritual. You find those guys. You drive down the road to the church in your town that's the biggest church in your town. They're going to have 2 or 3 guys that are paid full time just to do audio, visual, and website stuff.
Yeah,
that's their full time job.
Right.
It's not going to happen on our end.
Right. There's just not there's not enough of you to get to that point. With all of that, got a troll. Let's just go ahead and de-troll.
Is that how you know that you've made it?
A troll. That's a low order troll. We found a middle schooler.
Yeah.
So, by the way, this is not the standard by which you would just say we've been persecuted. We have been annoyed by the internet. I'll figure that out later. But you think about this. This is the last thing to think about. Now that you have identified that these pressures actually exist and these challenges are genuine and real, that leads to the next point. Make healthy decisions that prevent this from bubbling into a big issue. The solution, you have not yet resisted to having to blocking comments. Yes. Get yourself in a position to have some sort of healthy outlet to balance this out. Build a network of friends to talk about things. Learn to create an emotionally healthy relationship with your family, your personal family, immediate family, a healthy relationship with the leaderships that you serve with, and a practical understanding of the local church that you're part of, in the sense of, where do I fit in? And think about that. Here's another way to broach that. Sometimes when guys are looking for a place to preach, they're doing it based on its location or its wage. Like, where is it? What are they going to be able to provide support? Because if it's not enough, I'm going to have to get outside support. I don't want to do that. Include the metric of which one produces the best emotional kind of space for me to thrive in. I think that's in the last application space. You've got to make sure you protect that and invest in it, because I want all the guys who are preaching not only to be effective, but to continue to be effective over the course of their lives.
Well, I guess I just want to take a moment to say, if this is really a problem, I just want to say something to the non-preachers out there, which is, be nice. I mean, to me, that just seems to be Like, I think sometimes we overcomplicate this, Phil, but at the end of the day, just be nice.
Yeah.
And guys get tired of only hearing the things that are wrong. And it's there were times, I mean, I felt a little, I don't know about you, but I identified with Moses a little bit. That during the COVID thing, here we are working pretty hard to try to handle certain things, and it felt like sometimes no matter what you did, all they could think about was the leeks and cucumbers back in Egypt kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, here's the struggle I think people don't understand that aren't preachers. When you go to work and things at work are tough, your two refuges on earth are at your house with your family and at the assembly with your church family. Like, those are the two places you go for strength and comfort and re-energizing. And what happens when a preacher has turmoil at work, and I hate to use it that way, but let's just use that accommodatively. Typically, it brings frustration home. But the other thing is, you have one part of those two things robbed from you, because when you walk in the building, it is not a place of refreshment and rejuvenation and comfort. It's a place of stress. It's a place of anxiety. And especially when there's a lot of complaining and things that go on and people aren't happy because of this or because of that. And at the end of the day, the preacher dreads walking into the church assembly. And there's only so long that you can carry that burden till you break. And so just be nice. Be a kind person. And think about what you say. We were raised, mom told us, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all, kind of thing. And we become adults. And I think there's a lot of reasons, but I think in our society, we've just kind of forgotten that. And we just feel empowered to kind of vomit whatever we're thinking out into the world without any filter. And if I get mad about something, somebody needs to know, and I don't care. And I think that's something that the non-preacher needs to know, is the way you treat, the way you complain, the way you treat his family, the way you talk about him, the way you talk to him, the way you interact with him, the way you say things to the elders about him. They have an impact that is greater than you can ever imagine. And I don't know about you guys, but there's a part of me sometimes as a preacher, I wish I could just get up and go through the directory and let everybody have it the way that they let me have it, with the same critical eye. We don't do that. We know that's not right. But sometimes you get so beat up and so tired and so wounded, and you feel like that's your only recourse. That's why guys walk away. That's why they walk away. When I talk to guys who step down, and I talk to guys where they walking away from preaching, it is almost always about the interaction with the other people, including leadership, that overall could be fixed if we would just learn to be nice to each other.
Yeah. I think that's kind of the core of our, thoughts for today, as we're kind of pondering some things. Two other things tied together to this. Number one is we're coming into our summer session, which there will be a break, and we got a message this morning. Hey, you guys aren't doing anything. Those are just tech issues. But as we get to the next couple issues, send us some thoughts. We're kind of planning out next season already and thinking about what we're going to do. We've got some guests that we're probably going to try to arrange to come and participate. But we are open to new ideas, new things that you think are important for the local church. One of the things that we are looking for is if there's someone who has shifted out of preaching and has moved into a new area and feels comfortable talking about it, come talk to us. I think that'd be an important dialogue and interaction to have. Terry, any last thoughts for today?
No, I think my soapbox there at the end is good enough. I just look at the end of the day, we need each other. I mean, Chris has some good points there. He just said where the church becomes stagnant, it's a breeding ground for contempt. And one of the issues there is if you're going to have evangelism in the best biblical way, that includes everybody, not just the preacher. Everybody needs to love each other, get to work, take care of each other, be a family instead of a place you go to be entertained. There's a lot to be said there. Hopefully enough has been given to make you think. Our buddy Neil's up there who has stepped away. And I just want to say to Neil, I know that's hard. I know that we love you and we hate to see that, but we know that it's hard on guys that have felt like they had to step away for sure.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Lord bless you in your work. And if we can help you in some way,